Welcome to the Operate Podcast, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at company building from the perspective of the builders themselves. This is how we operate.
Welcome to the Operate Show. I'm Kerry Ransom. I'm super excited to have my new friend, Luke Cooper, with me on the show today. And before we get to hear from Luke, let me tell you a little bit about him. He is the founder and CEO of Fixt, which is an innovative mobile device support and repair business that he started several years ago and sold very successfully earlier this year. And so over the last 7 years, he's been through this great entrepreneurial journey, which we're going to spend some time talking about today. And, as I really dug into his background, he has a really incredible pedigree and background to prepare him for this journey. And so I want to talk somewhat about that on the show today as well. Like, how does the operator get built? He had been a lawyer at one of the biggest and most prominent law firms in the world called DLA Piper. He was in-house counsel at a large financial services firm. And he even was strategy lead and kind of the critical part of another startup team that grew and successfully exited. So a really nice mix of backgrounds, which we want to explore. Luke, thanks for joining me on the show today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm always excited to tell the story and meet great founders and CEOs and people interested in entrepreneurship. So thank you.
Well, I talk about, this is a great jumping off point. I talk a lot about how important storytelling is to the successful company, successful entrepreneur. So, gave a brief introduction to Fixt. Let's talk about the founding story. How did you come to start this?
Yeah. It's so funny that the comment you just made is so reflective of my general philosophy around, building healthy culture in a startup company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because culture is really the stories that you tell,
mm-hmm.
right? It's all these little stories make up the truth behind, what you actually deliver on to your employees, to your customers, and to your investors. So when we started out in 2013, we had all the culture issues figured out. No, not even close, right?
And often it doesn't happen. I mean, I find sometimes that core culture, it takes a little bit of time to take hold. Anyway, you're trying to survive. You're trying to figure it out and survive in those first, early days.
Exactly. And you really need, what was successful for us is that we shared office space with a couple other companies that were way more mature, and they operated in a different environment. They were non-tech companies, more traditional, classical businesses that had some kind of culture already that we could sort of draft off of, and that was helpful, right? So for founders, I always, I tell them to get into situations where they're going to be around other people because, it'll produce, that kind of proximity will produce good ideas and other thinking and resources, right?
Yep.
But when we started in 2013, the world was very different, and the idea was that we could resolve and fix the claims process within insurance because it was fundamentally broken. I'd seen this problem sort of repeating itself within my time at State Farm. I was an in-house counsel, and I just saw how consumers are getting just a bad experience whenever they broke things or whenever things failed that they were covered by insurances. And so in 2013, just, sort of thinking about the problem, trying to find a co-founder, you need somebody technical that understands insurance and all this other stuff, really hard to do, and really lost, quite frankly, in the first year. Now the TLDR to the whole story, right, is that, by 2014, we figured it out. By 2015, 16, we began growing revenue 400% year over year. We grew the team from 2 people to 25 people, incredibly diverse, 50% of the team, African-American, Latino, 5 Black men on the team. Like, that's not even a thing.
Yeah,
and most technology companies in America, right?
That's right.
But those are the TLDRs, and we sold the company for 11 times revenue after growing it, many hundreds of % year over year, right? That's a TLDR, but the reality is it took us time to really figure out these pieces and these steps. And, I try to encourage entrepreneurs to think big, but act small, right? Because that is your gateway, and that's your real power. Because big companies, they think big too. They absolutely think big.
Yes.
And they've seen big things happening, right? But they tend to act big too.
That's right.
Right.
That's
and
right.
acting
That's
big
your
requires you to
advantage,
build a
right?
big thing.
Yeah.
That's your advantage. Your advantage is
That's right.
acting small and finding little discoveries that then lead to the bigger things.
Yes.
And the discovery that we specifically found in 2014, I found it, came on a bus, right? I was fortunate as I'm floundering around with this, this idea for how to improve insurance. Like I had a web platform, but like nothing more than that. And I'm on a bus in Boulder. I was lucky to get into this program called Techstars, #1 accelerator for startup companies. And I was spending time in Boulder. I was in Colorado, and week 4 or 5 of the program, something like that. It's a 12-week program, and I don't have the idea, right? Like they're telling me, like, Luke, this sucks. Like what you're talking about is great in terms of like the market, the industry, but like you don't have a real solid idea yet, right? And so I'm just lost. I'm like 6-7 weeks away from demo day. Like, what are we gonna do? And I'm sitting on a bus, and I dropped my phone accidentally on the bus. And everyone around me had the exact same experience. And I instantly started to talk to them. And what they were nervous about, what they had expressed anxiety over was their experience at the Apple Store, was their experience with their insurance company, the mobile carrier, all of those cast of characters, none of them cared about the experience that was driven by, that they were expecting to get. And so I instantly began to think, well, what if I could change that? Like, so I asked them straight up, I said, well, how much would you pay if I, when I broke my phone, someone gave me a new one or met me and repaired it? Like right when I got off the bus, they're like, whoa, that would blow my mind. I was like, okay, now I have a sense of what I should like aim toward. And that like led to a bunch of tiny experiments where we would, our first couple of builds were very simple app that I could go to CU Boulder, downtown Pearl Street Mall, wherever in Colorado, and just like give people my phone and say, hey, what is this? What do you think it is? How does it work? And it took, multiple weeks before we got to a place where I can just give my phone to the person blindly and say, what is this? And they would say, oh, this is some kind of insurance app to get your phone repaired or replaced or whatever. And that's when we knew, okay, we got the right general product. We need to start thinking about the markets that we're going to be involved in, et cetera. And that's where we, sort of began to raise money and grow the company from there. But yeah, it was a great experience. I mean, in the outer years, we once we figured it out, we didn't start like with all of that stuff figured out. We started with the product figured out, but the market not figured out. And we initially went after consumers. And what we learned in the very earliest stages was like we were not, well structured to go after consumers. And I think what I try to advise the founders that I coach and the teams that I work with to think about like their geography, both universally and also like, locally, right? No, you universally think about it because your geography shouldn't like limit you from expanding an idea internationally right away, right? Like you got to think as a founder, how do I go attack international markets immediately, right? That's the world's smaller place. But that being said, you've got to think about where you are locally as well. And if you are a consumer application trying to operate out of DC, you're not going to find investors, right? Investors on the East Coast in this region of the country are more spreadsheet investors. They want to see your traction. They want to see revenue. What's your plan to profitability? Like profitability is a big part of the discussion.
What's that?
Yeah, right. Whereas on the West Coast, it's very different, right? And so I think, minding where you are originating the idea truly matters, right? Because it would tell you what kind of company you can build or what kind of resources and talent you have access to, right? A lot of cybersecurity talent here in Maryland. So, we were able to think about that very sort of pragmatically. And by 2014, after we raised a little bit of money, we raised roughly, after Techstars, we raised roughly $500,000 back of the napkin idea in our seed stage. We had to pivot because we would need to raise $50 million to go do that. And that wasn't going to be possible from Baltimore. And so we looked at the enterprise market. And when we looked at the enterprise market, there was roughly 18 to $20 billion of activity happening, of people repairing phones, replacing devices, entering tickets for broken things. All this activity happening in the enterprise market, complete white space. There's nobody there, right? No one's offering any on-demand services. No one's offering this highly integrated customer experience that, could show you all your devices in one, one view, one pane of glass. No one was thinking about these things, live tracking. So you knew when your technician was going to, come on site. Lots of like little tiny things that we just were thinking about at a time when no one else was in the enterprise space. And we were able to, again, we thought like we could have the whole enterprise space, 18 to 20 billion, but we acted small. The first thing we did was go talk to some early customers, like local, like Johns Hopkins, for example, which, got us in the habit of talking to CIOs and talking their language and how they speak, how they buy, right? All those things were things that we were learning. Coca-Cola, a very innovative, forward-thinking company, took a chance on us very early on. And through the selling process, through the sales process with them, we uncovered, differentials between what they said the problem was and what the problem actually was, which gave us more insight, because they would tell us, we think the problem is this, and like our people have this issue, et cetera. But then we watched them logging things into their ticketing systems, et cetera, and that wasn't the problem. It was something else. And so we just took those learnings and we were able to bake them into our platform in a way that, had more, broader appeal to the entire enterprise segment. And that is what led to a lot of our success, and eventually, the exit this earlier in Q3 by Assurant. So yeah, we're really proud of the progress that we made and where we got to. But I'm leaving out for time's sake.
That's right.
All the bad investor stories. I think I've told you, starting the company out a month after starting it, our daughter was struck with stage 4 cancer. We went through a year of chemotherapy, radiation while I'm raising the seed round. And we got through that. She's 100% cancer free today, and the company is successful and part of a large, Fortune 300 organization. So
amazing.
Yeah. So my message to entrepreneurs is both, hey, be practical minded when it comes to thinking big but acting small, and resilience. Those are two things that I think you absolutely need.
That's right. Oh, totally. So much here to dig into. This is good. Thank you for starting there. Okay, so you talked about you originally, hey, we're going to go consumer market, and then you both with the realization maybe, hey, this is going to be way too expensive. We may not have the chops or the experience to do it. Let's go a little deep. Like, what were there any data, any experiments that you ran, or were there any data that was just so glaring to you? Because sometimes we ignore that, right? We
Totally.
Get headstrong and we say, like, I know this is a consumer problem. I need to go get to them. I need to own the customer, or whatever, or narrative that's out there. Like, what was it that really got you to say, okay, we have to go do this differently?
Yeah, so I'll start from the mindset perspective first, right? Like there's a book I read recently and had a quote about Steve Jobs. It talked about him being having strong beliefs, like loosely held, right? I think it's probably a comment lots of us have heard, and I think that's a very important mindset for founders, right? I admire Steve Jobs, but not in the same way that I don't deify the guy, because I don't think he was a great leader. I think he had a really great team that put up with a lot of great, ideas that he had that they brought to fruition. But I think the best leaders, they are strong in their convictions and intuitions, which are, usually founded on data and some other intuitions that they have, market insight. Right? And you need that as a founder. You should not divorce yourself of that. That's your power, right? It's a superpower. That's right. But at the same time, you've got to loosely, hold on to those constructs, right? Because your goal, your job is to get to the fucking, can I curse on this?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, your job is to get to the moon, right?
That's right.
Like, what do you care how you get there?
That's right.
Right? Like you kind of care, but you really don't care how you get there. So for us, I knew we wanted to get to the moon, and that was the goal. Whether we got there through consumers or we got there through enterprise, the goal is to get to the moon. What told us that not consumers was that you had $12.5 billion of activity in the consumer market. You got $25 billion unmet, unserviced in the enterprise space. you've got the carriers moving away from subsidies. In 2014, the carrier said, Verizon, AT&T said, we're no longer giving you $99 upgrades for free or free upgrades. We're doing away with that. That's a fundamental market change, right? So when I talk to founders, it's like, well, who gave you permission to come up with this idea and promote it, in this market, right? Like, you got to get permission based on some underlying market structure or data that, sort of transforms the market, that allows your solution, your thing to propagate differently than everything else, right?
Yep.
And there are lots of examples of the history. Webvan, for example, they raised $600 million. Most people are not going to even know what Webvan is, but in 2000, $600 million in a startup is an incredible amount of money. And all they did was, it was Amazon Prime. That's all it was, right?
That's right.
But why couldn't that, get out there? It was because there's no vehicle, there's no mobile platform that in 2000, nothing like that, right? So these are the ways I try to encourage them to think about. And the data that we saw that supported the decision was the number of Apple stores out there, right? Like at the time in 2014, I think there might've been 260 Apple stores. Today there might be 400 or three something. But there are 50,000 Genius Bar appointments, 50,000 Genius Bar appointments, right? So if I just took that number and I said, okay, 50,000 consumers are logging complaints, related to their Apple phones every day. How many are across the enterprise globally? At least twice that. So 100. And where are they going? They're not sending their people to the Apple store. They can't, right? So there's more unmet demand. And then those are the quantifiable measures that told us there's something here, right? But the homework part of it is to begin talking to people and doing intense discovery to figure those things out.
That's great. So let's go even a little bit into that. So how did you learn to do that homework? What was it in your background? I talked about some of your experiences prior. What was it? Because I think for many, it's learned by doing, and it's often the mistakes you made. But I mean, you hit it on your first one. So what was it that gave you that training to be able to do the homework, to be able to balance this kind of vision with pragmatism?
I think honestly, my source, really derives, from one place, Kerry, and it's a place of courage, right? And I think as an entrepreneur, that one of the key distinctions I see between the truly great entrepreneurs that figure it out, or are on their way to figuring it out, and the ones that just have an idea that once it falters, they're just gone, is courage, right? The ability to fight through those things, ask the really tough questions, not only of customers, but of yourself, right? And my courage comes from, watching my mom, early on. One of the stories I tell are, really related to the three sort of things that made up Luke Cooper as a 12-year-old boy. The three things that happened to me as a 12-year-old that sort of inspired the narrative arc for my life. The first thing was my dad went away to jail for 20 years, right? I got every excuse in the world to go hide. I have every excuse in the world to quit life, to go sell drugs. If I would have been a drug dealer, everybody will understand that, right? My cousins are all locked up, they're in jail, and I understand, right? And that would have been acceptable. But for me, I want more. I think everybody wants more for their life. You just don't know how to access it, right? My mom taught me how to access it, because the second thing that happened to me was we went up on this she got us into this airfield where they took us up on a Cessna plane, my sister and I, for a day trip, and we just went around parts of New York and Connecticut, and it was the first time I'd seen the world from that perspective, right? It's the first time I'd ever flown. I was 12. And it's amazing. My kids have flown, they have passports. They've been to Tokyo, all over the world at this place, and just a very different life than the one I grew up in. And my mom, but what I later learned, Kerry, was that my mom, the week before that, she'd gone over to the airfield and just asked one of the pilots. She just said, "Hey, we're poor. We grew up. We live in the project housing down the street here. Can you help us? Can you, I wanted my kids to see the world." And the guy was just like, "Well, if you come here next week at 5 a.m, they do these little runs and you can get up there, no problem." And we're off 5 a.m. doing this, right? And so it was the first time I'd see my project housing from that distance, right? So it gave me distance from a painful past that wasn't connected to my identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about like what it takes to go up to somebody and ask them like, why did you react that way when I dropped my phone? Why did you act that way, when you logged the ticket this way, but you said the problem was this, right? Like it just all stems from the courage to go do that. And guess what? As a Black entrepreneur, like one of the hardest things about, what's happening in this country today, I'll just say 2 seconds about this, is that this is how it permeates entrepreneurship for Black entrepreneurs, right? Like we think about, racism, systemic racism, in the context of policing and like these big institutional things like that. But like we don't tend to think about it in like the $17 billion, $20 billion venture capital, industry, right? And those problems absolutely pervade. And so not only does it affect you in terms of fundraising, but it affects you in terms of how you are received if you're a Black entrepreneur like me walking up to some random person in the street asking them about an idea. Because in my mind, that is the best way to get quick market signal, right? But I scare people. I'm a 6-foot Black man, walking up to you. And so like those are real things. But again, whether you're a white dude and you've never really talked to people, you're a white woman and you're afraid that you might be rejected, or you're a Black man and like you're afraid of racism, it takes courage to get over those things and walk through them. And that's the only reason I'm sitting here today and having answered some of those questions that were necessary to ask to get to the exit that we just did.
Amazing. So at what point did you really understand that courage from your mother to do that? Because that's to me that's so formative. And I mean, and you bring up the right point too of like, I look at my kids and all the blessings and really easy life that they've been handed. And I feel like my job ends up being, I have to inspire them to go think bigger, be bigger. Don't just rest on this, like build upon this, go do more because of it. And, they need to demonstrate courageousness at whatever level they can. But I mean, that story about your mom's amazing because as you said, the courage, but that models it hopefully. But when did you find out? Like, when did you really understand and appreciate that?
Yeah, such a great question. So I didn't really appreciate that. Like when I was younger, going around telling the story, talking to kids to inspire them or whatever, I just told the story about the airplane and I participated also as a 12-year-old in this program called NIFTY, National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship, and I built solar-powered microwaves. And that's what won me my science competition and my business plan competition. So at 12, think about that as a 12-year-old boy.
That's amazing.
Your father goes away to jail for 20 years. My mom takes us up on this plane, and then I do this program where I build things, and I'm like, holy shit! I won. I made money.
Like, hey, I can do this.
Is big. Absolutely, right? And so I think it comes down to like when you think about like how to like systematize, the process of courage enhancement or whatever you want to call it. It comes from like, these small moments, right? Like even with my children, I put them in these small moments where, hey, you've got to like really help. You got to really figure it out for yourself, whether it's an argument or a disagreement with their sibling, whether it's an issue with an adult at school where, my son might not like one of the coaches or something going on. Well, how are you going to deal with it? Well, have you talked to him about it yet? Right. Usually, we skip over like the most basic form of dispute resolution, of confidence building, which is, hey, have you gone to the person directly and just had a conversation, right? I think these little things are ways that you build confidence, courage in kids and adults, right? I watch it every day in a big company where people don't really have the hard conversations because sometimes they're afraid, right?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right.
It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to figure out. It is.
It is. But it
can be broken with courage.
Yeah, but there are those moments that I think that's the key, right? I love, for example, I love interns, and I love it in startups, especially because sort of 2 or 3 reasons, but I would say that, a couple quick ones are, number one, you're giving them access to something that they don't even fully understand and appreciate until later. And you know that because, you know, going into a big company that and experiencing sort of being an intern, you're sort of just another cog in this wheel. You go into a startup and even if you're doing menial type things in there, it's so flat. There's so much access. You just get to absorb it. And then you prove anything and you just get handed work, right? And all of a sudden you're going, wait, like they're not that far away from me. I can be that, right? And so I think it just naturally breeds it. And I love it. Like when I see that person get unlocked like that, it just brings so much joy to me. So I love that and finding that out, and then even working with entrepreneurs, which I know you do as well, and somehow mirroring back to them that confidence of you've got this, and you know that they can see it too. I was talking to somebody recently, and they were saying they encourage they're in Europe, and they encourage their entrepreneurs to go to Silicon Valley and spend time there. And the reason they do it is not that that's some great shining example of brilliance in the world. They're saying go there so you can realize they're no different than you are.
So true.
And I think that that's the work that we have to do to continue to build those bridges, is just to reach into, you know, outside of our comfort zones, outside of our communities, and say, you can do this too, or you can do this. You've got this. This is your area of genius. How do we? I mean, you know, you're part of this program at 12. I didn't get to do that at 12. That's amazing. But that for you, that unlocked that brilliance. That's incredible.
I was very lucky. Yeah, you raise a great point, Gary. I think Citigroup just did a study on this where they looked at a 20-year cycle since 2000, and they observed that, and they have the data to back this up, that we've lost $1 trillion of economic activity that would have otherwise been in this economy if not for racial disparities, systemic racial disparities, right? You think about lending, you think about, you know, the underbanked, all the things, right? And they only looked at maybe 20% of the economy.
Sure.
So maybe there's like 5 trillion there, right? But like that's what this is fundamentally about. It's not about like fairness or equality for quality's sake, right? It is more about like making the whole product, the whole thing better. And we can do that by enabling more, you know, people to participate, you know, more fully in the economy. And we just haven't done a good job of that. Like you think about like this country's like tremendous success, all the ingenuity that came out of like the Edison of technology and the Einstein era of technology. Like we've only been accessing and using 40. I mean, we weren't using women, not like, you know, overtly and obviously in a way that gave them recognition for their incredible contributions. Like you think of all the women that contributed to the NASA, you know, NASA space program, et cetera. We didn't give them, you know, tacit acknowledgement. We should have, right? And African Americans like that were looked at as slaves, you know, even far beyond the end of slavery and the Jim Crow era, right? And so now we're getting to this place, hopefully, where we've demonstrated sufficiently that anybody can run this country, right?
That's right.
For example, you know, we've had great presidents. We've had, you know, a president over the last 4 years, and we have right, exactly. So I think, you know, this reckoning in some ways is about like demonstration that like, and like you said, anybody can participate, anybody can build, you know, excellence and have a good life based on, you know, just nothing more than their own ingenuity and effort.
That's right. And it's, you know, it's sort of making it available and accessible to everyone. You know, where we are born, you know, the circumstances of all that, we don't have any control over that. That just happens. But
that's right.
The ability to do something once we are here, we should continue to work to try and provide that opportunity to everyone as equally as possible. And then, you know, you if you're willing to sort of go for it, then you should have the same opportunity as everybody else, right? And that I think that is at least in our consciousness at a level that we haven't seen ever, which is a good place to start, right? That means, okay,
absolutely.
now we can.
Yeah,
So
well said.
I agree with you. So,
Yeah, well said.
I'm a big believer. One of the things I say a lot, and why we started this venture studio, is this idea of more people should experience success, more of this confidence. When you see a support system, maybe that gets you incrementally to the level of courage you need. I mean, it's all of this is about, like, can we be this stimulus, right? And so one of the things I say is we want to do our best to keep founders in their area of genius, because they're going to be more likely to be successful if they can spend more of their time in the area that they are uniquely capable, gifted, their unique insight, as opposed to being distracted into all the other things they have to think about or do. So as you think about your company, you had done a number of things prior, but I guarantee you there were a lot of things that you had to go figure out.
Sure.
And there were some of those that maybe you shouldn't have had to go figure out. That the next time, if you do another one, that you'll probably solve that differently.
Totally.
So give me as you think about that, are there a couple examples of things you go, man, I had to go figure that out? Because often you're looking around the room and you go, well, there's nobody else here to do it. I guess I have to go do it. What I'm saying is, I don't think that's as efficient and effective as we need to be in helping create these companies and support founders in the way that we can, where, I can look from where I am and say, no, you shouldn't do that. There's a faster, better, cheaper way to do that. Stay in the ring where you are, where you're best, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I would put it under themes, right? Like the disparate areas under themes. Like the first theme around product. I do product very differently. Like when I started in 2013, it was like, okay, this is what we think we should build based on very sparse data, very sparse information and feedback from customers, like no market signal. And then we kind of built it ourselves, up a little bit internally, and we handed it off to a developer that just, gave us back, a web platform that was
like
crap,
this is what you asked me to build. Here you go.
Here you go, right? And I'm like, well, why can't I get customers? Right? Because it doesn't work that way. You got to go get the customers first, and that means you got to sell vision, right? You got to sell vision. You got to sell breadcrumbs to the thing that makes them rely on you, right? And so, like, once we figured that out in 2014, 15, it became easier to have those conversations. I would not build a real product in the first year or two of a startup. I might build like a bunch of like lightweight demos that some of them more hefty than others, that really demonstrated what we were trying to achieve and just show traction. Even if it's synthetic traction, like, hey, we're getting a bunch of people inquiring about this, over time, and that number is massively week over week, right? A stronger story. Then I got a product that I built, and it's amazing because I'm so smart. I'm an engineer, I'm a product manager, and I just know how to build great product. Investors can't get behind that story, right? Yep. So that's the first step. The second theme I would say is culture. I mean, Jesus, like I think when we really like seriously focus on culture by 2018, things changed like fundamentally for us, right? It became, even though it was not easier to raise money, dealing with the challenges related to raising money were easier, right? The team was way more aligned. We developed way more shared consciousness. What was in Luke's head was in everybody's head. Luke stopped being like the blocker to things. People stopped coming in saying, okay, well, we can't make a move or we can't do this really important thing unless we talk to Luke first. Sure. It's like, no, we're going to have these 8 leadership principles, one of them being informed captains, which means that you got it. Like no decision can be made unless someone owns that decision, and it can't be Luke, right? And we made that transition. It was like the whole team got more autonomy. They got more control. One of my interns, like you talk about interns, one of my interns, came on unpaid, then paid, worked his behind off. Like he's like in only 2 years, he is a well-regarded business analyst within Assurant now, the company that acquired us. Like his path is paved, right? One of our other employees, she's a single mom, Black single mom from Baltimore, didn't go to college, but like by strict adherence and thinking and incorporating our leadership principles into our everyday life and to how we execute it every day. She runs one of our biggest accounts, right? Doesn't have a college education, runs one of our biggest accounts, most profitable account. And then secondly, on the exit, made $500,000. I mean, it's life-changing money for her, right? Life-changing money. And that's what this is all about, right?
Absolutely.
So I would all over again, product would be different, culture would be different, team alignment would be different. I start, sort of differently. I would do everything. I wouldn't do anything that didn't matter. Like, we spent so much time on branding and I had a CMO in year one. Like, what are you marketing?
That's right. Exactly.
Like marketing is nothing more than customer discovery in year one, right?
That's right.
And I just I would do those things fundamentally different. I know I could move a lot faster, on the next thing when it comes around.
Yeah, I don't want to pick on your CMO, but I want to go into that one for a second. So
yeah, sure.
I have this concept. I'm shocked that it doesn't exist because I actually did a Google search. I call it role stage fit. And that it's key. I mean, to your point, like, we don't need a CMO. We may never in the evolution of this business actually need a CMO, because like, there is a somewhat definitional title of a CMO in the world, which is a pretty broad span role where you're doing a lot of marketing things, right? I mean, and depending on the industry, it changes. But as you look back, because I think this is super instructive for other entrepreneurs, what was it that led you to feel the need or actually act on that belief that you needed a CMO?
I think it doesn't take much, right? Like, startups are delusional, right?
Yes.
We're good at, we have a lot of capacity.
You have to be to start. I mean, obviously you have to be delusional to start it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think it's good and it's bad, right? Because you need that to just get out of the blocks, right? And get out of the gate. But at the same time, like, you need a layer of advisory support sometimes, and just common sense, and just the ability to move yourself away from a position, right? One thing about the founders is, like, we can be dog-minded about things, which makes us great because we're going to keep our customers, we're going to grow, right? But at the same time, you got to be able to let go of some directions that are not working, or are not well optimized for where you want to go. And that just takes maturity, recognition. Like, a lot of companies don't get that right the first time. And I think when I was thinking about a CMO, I was just thinking about what I wanted to represent to investors, because I needed to raise money. And I thought if I had a strong team, right, that would fill the place. But investors care about strong teams for sure, but they care about strong teams in the context of what you're actually doing. That's and right. And what you've, in the context of that question that you just asked me, right? Because they're going to ask me the same question. And if the answer is oh, I hired this person because they're an amazing CMO and I don't have a need for a CMO,
that's right.
They're not going to write a check.
That's right.
Right?
I mean, the crazy thing is some will. Some will. Yeah. The ones that you want involved probably won't. But some will. Some will look at that. I mean, there's a reason that deck slide exists with team, and as opposed to saying, I'm actually really good at allocating capital to the highest and best use at each stage. And that's why this concept of role stage fit is, I say,
role stage. I love it. I love it.
You may need an intern to do marketing at this stage.
Totally.
Right? Because this is what marketing is in our business at this stage. And again, it depends on the lens people are looking through. But yeah, it's such a, I mean, the one I've seen far too often is CFO. Yeah. And you hire a CFO.
I have one of those too.
Really early. And what I'll say to a founder when they bring it up is I'll say, look, is this a real CFO, or are you just giving them a title? And they're like, no, this is a real CFO. And I said, okay, then you're in big trouble, because they don't want to process payroll. They don't want to go do collections. They don't want to pay your invoices. That's all you really need right now. And they're going to find things to do. And then all of a sudden you're going to have 5 people on your finance and accounting team, and you don't even have a product yet. That is a really, really, it's fun. To me, that's a fun discussion, but it can be really challenging.
Right. No, you're 100% right. I think what you're pointing to, all these things, Carrie, can just be put under one bucket, right? In terms of maybe number 1 or number 2 in terms of the top reasons why startups fail. Yeah. Early scaling. What you think is there is not there, right? That's right. And so it requires data benchmarks, right? Like maybe I do need to hire a CFO, but like, what are the benchmarks that are going to tell me it's time to hire a CFO, CMO, et cetera? Like we had a CFO too. So when we out of the gates with no real product, we had a CMO, CFO, we hired a COO eventually and a chief revenue officer. Our CFO, sat around like knitting all day. It had nothing, listening to classical music and knitting all day. And like, it would drive me crazy.
Of course it would,
What can I say? Like, I hired her, right? And so like, I think these are the kinds of decisions that like,
hey, you succeeded,
you're gonna have
man.
to reckon with.
Yeah, you still succeeded. But those are great stories. I so appreciate you sharing those. So, couple final things. I would love for you to send me those 8 leadership principles, because I want to share those with my audience, because I mean, just the way you are, the way you think, I just find to be so compelling. And I feel so fortunate that we've met, because I'm like, we're going to do something together. This guy and I we're two kindred spirits around this. So yeah, so I love it. And so I want to share that. But as you think about this entrepreneur who like they're trying to figure it out. You talked about that courage and resilience as critical skills. But this year, to me, is the year of the emergent entrepreneur. I'm not saying they had to have started it right now, but I think you've got this huge, this confluence of crazy things that have all come together this year to create a new consciousness for people to really tap into and say, what is my real purpose in this world? What should I be doing? Sort of shock us out of the inertia that often affects our lives. So as you think about, this is the year of the entrepreneur. What advice would you have for people that are, at least that fire's starting to burn a little bit, and they're going, maybe over the next 12 months, I need to start my plan for how I go figure this out for me and what I should do. What advice would you have for them? Like, how did they become an operator?
Yeah, I would say see past your success or failure, right? Like before anything else, see past success or failure. Because when you got at that stage, right? Because if you got an idea, something that you're working full time, right, somewhere, and you just like you want to tinker with something that you think could be a thing, right? You're gonna get all kinds of feedback, right? Mm-hmm. Like some of the feedback is going to be, most of it is going to be, at best cryptic, right? Yes. People are saying, oh yeah, I don't really understand it, but like, it sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. It's a great idea. I would totally buy that, right? And like, you don't really believe them.
Yes.
But you can delude yourself into thinking that what they're telling you is like, this is a great idea, and they would do that. You got to move past that. You got to move past, even if it's all positive, you got to move past that to say, well, let me ask 5 why questions, all right? So what I did in the very earliest stages is ask the why question, like why? Well, why do you think it's a great idea? Well, why? Well, why? Well, why would you pay for it? Well, why would you share that with someone else? Well, why would you then use it again? Well, why would you come back? Like, these are questions that direct your entire funnel, right?
Right.
How customers are going to move through the funnel. So I would just, encourage entrepreneurs not to quit, right? Mm-hmm. Move past whatever, first layer of feedback they get from users, friends, whoever it is, to the deeper question so that they can truly solve hard problems. That's what this is about. We need you, just like we need OC4, like to be out there solving hard problems, right? Because we got so many of them in the world. And you're right, this is the year of the entrepreneur. There are lots of entrepreneurs that look like me that have not been in mass use for a long time. And wait till that amount of vibranium is like unleashed on the universe. It's so much that we can do.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining me on the show, for being just a giver of light and energy and encouragement. It's awesome. And I'm so appreciative of our emerging friendship. So thanks again, and keep doing what you're doing, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Operate Podcast. If you like this conversation, as a favor to me, you can rate us, review us, or subscribe, or tell your friends. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at Operate Podcast. Until next week, get out there and operate.